Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today. Usually we look at systems economics, history, tech things that are, external.
Right. Out there.
Today we're looking inward. We are looking at the literal pillar that holds you up. We've got a stack of anatomy texts here, Gray's, Moore's, some neurosurgery papers, and we are going to deconstruct the human spine, but not the whole thing.
Deconstruct is exactly the right word because when you actually dig into the source material, the spine isn't just one thing. It's not a single pole. It's a series of, well, distinct machines stacked right on top of each other.
That was the biggest takeaway for me reading through this. We
Yeah.
usually just say, my back hurts or it tweaked my neck.
Yeah.
But the engineering specs for the neck, the cervical spine, are completely different from the specs for the chest, the thoracic spine.
Oh, completely.
It's like comparing a fighter jet to a tank. One is built for extreme maneuverability, and the other is built for armor and stability.
That's a fantastic analogy. You have this incredible mobility at the top and then this armored protection right in the middle. And the transition points between them, that's where things get really, really interesting.
So here is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to decode the upper two-thirds of this axis of life. We are strictly looking at the cervical region, the neck, and the thoracic region, the part that anchors your chest.
Yeah, we have to leave the lower back for another day.
We have to. Honestly, the notes were just too extensive, and the mechanics were a totally different world.
Oh.
We want to understand the machinery that lets you nod yes, shake your head no, and, essentially build a fortress around your heart and lungs.
It's a really good distinction to make. The demands placed on the neck are just fundamentally different from the demands on the rib cage area. The neck is all about mobility and sensory orientation.
Getting your head where it needs to be.
Exactly. So you can see and hear. The thoracic spine is about stability and protection. And if you look at the sources, the bones themselves, they reflect those job descriptions perfectly.
So here is our roadmap. First, we are going to unpack the delicate, high-mobility architecture of the cervical spine. Then we'll get into what our notes call the mythology of the top two vertebrae, the atlas and the axis, because they are basically their own unique species of bone.
They really are. They break almost every rule of what you think a typical vertebra is.
Then we'll move down into the thoracic region, that rigid fortress of the chest. Look at how the ribs actually attach, which is fascinating. And finally, we'll look at the rebels, the atypical vertebrae that mark the transition points where the spine decides to change its nature.
It's a journey from flexibility to rigidity, from the top down.
Let's dive right in. Section 1, the cervical region. Now, looking at the text, we have 7 cervical vertebrae, C1 through C7. And the first thing that jumps out at you when you look at a skeleton is just the size. These things are tiny compared to the big lumbar blocks at the bottom.
Right. They're small. And that makes perfect sense from a physics standpoint. If you think about a building, the pillars at the top don't need to be as massive as the pillars in the basement because they're carrying less load.
Yeah, the cervical vertebrae only have to support the head.
Which is heavy, don't get me wrong.
It feels heavy at the end of a long day. I think the average human head is what, like 10 to 12 pounds?
Yeah.
Bowling ball, basically.
Yeah.
But structurally, it's not that much weight compared to the entire torso and everything else.
Exactly. So the bodies of these vertebrae, the cylindrical drums at the front of the bone, are relatively delicate. But there's a very, very specific way to identify them. If I handed you a random vertebra from a box of bones and asked, is this from the neck? There is one feature, an ID badge, really, that gives it away instantly.
The foramen transversarium.
Precisely. That's the one.
I love that term. It sounds so ancient. But let's unpack what it actually is mechanically. We know foramen just means hole in anatomy speak.
Yes. And transversarium refers to the transverse processes. These are the little bony wings that stick out on the left and right sides of the vertebra.
Okay.
In the lumbar and thoracic spine, those wings are solid bone. They are just levers for muscles to pull on. But in the cervical spine, and only in the cervical spine, evolution drilled a hole right through them.
And this isn't just a random design flaw or a way to save weight, right? This hole has a very high-stakes job.
It's incredibly high stakes. This little tunnel protects the vertebral artery. This is one of the critical blood supply lines going straight up to the brain, specifically the brainstem and the posterior part of the brain.
That stops me in my tracks every time I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We always think of the spine as protecting the spinal cord, the nerves. That's its main job. But here in the neck, the bone is actually evolving to protect the blood flow too.
It absolutely has to. Think about the crazy mobility of the neck. We twist it, we bend it, we whip it around to look behind us. If that artery were just floating loose in the soft tissue like a vein in your arm, it could get kinked or compressed every single time you looked over your shoulder.
Like a garden hose getting a kink in it.
Exactly like a garden hose. And if you kink the hose to your brain, you pass out. Or worse, you have a stroke. By threading it through these bony loops, the foramen transversarium anatomy ensures that the brain's fuel line is shielded during all that movement. The bone moves and it carries the artery safely with it.
But isn't there a risk there too? I mean, what if the bone breaks? Does it shear the artery?
That is the trade-off. It's absolutely a double-edged sword. The bone protects the artery from soft tissue compression in daily life, but in a high-velocity trauma like a car accident or a severe whiplash, the bone itself can act like a guillotine. A fracture of that transverse process can dissect the vertebral artery. So yes, the armor can become the weapon.
That is a terrifying thought, but comforting to know the engineering is there for normal life. So if you see a hole in the side wings, it's a neck bone. Done. Now let's look at the typical cervical vertebrae, which the texts list as C3 through C6. They have some other quirky features.
They do. Let's start with the main drum of the bone, the body. In the neck, it's small, and it's wider side to side than it is front to back. But the shape of the top surface is fascinating. It isn't flat at all.
No, it isn't.
It's concave.
The source material describes it as having upward projecting lips.
Yes, specifically on the sides. Imagine a shallow soup bowl, or maybe a saddle. The sides curve up, and the vertebra sitting on top of it has a bottom surface that is convex or beveled to match. So they fit together almost like stacking Pringles chips or a saddle joint.
That seems like it would add a lot of stability side to side.
It does. It creates these small joints on the sides called the uncinate processes, or the joints of Luschka. These aren't really present at birth. They actually develop as you age and start moving your head around. They guide the motion of the neck, allowing for that smooth gliding, flexion, and extension while limiting any side-to-side slippage.
It's like a built-in track system.
Exactly. A built-in track system for the head.
And then we have the spinal cord itself. In the necks, the spinal cord is actually quite thick, isn't it?
It is. This is the main trunk line coming right off the brainstem. It hasn't given off many of the big nerves yet, so it's bulky. It's at its widest point here, really.
So the hole in the bone has to accommodate that.
Right. The hole in the center of the bone, the vertebral foramen, is large and distinctly triangular. It has to be triangular to accommodate that cervical enlargement of the cord. If it were small and round like it is in the chest, the cord would be compressed.
Okay, so we have a small body with a saddle shape, holes in the side wings for arteries, and a big triangular space for the cord. But my favorite feature of the neck vertebrae, the one that feels the most alien, is the spinous process. This is the part that sticks out the back.
The part you can feel if you run your hand down the back of your neck.
Right. But in the cervical region, looking at C3, C4, C5, the tip isn't a point. It's split.
It's bifid.
Bifid. Like a snake's tongue.
Exactly. It forks at the end. It's a very strange look if you're not expecting it.
Why? I mean, is there a mechanical reason for the snake tongue?
Always. There's always a reason. Think about surface area. The neck has this complex web of muscles. The nuchal ligament, the deep rotators, the semispinalis. These muscles need to grab onto these bones to hold your heavy head up against gravity all day.
Okay.
If you just had a single point, you'd have one small attachment site. By splitting the tip into two tubercles, you effectively double the surface area for muscle and ligament attachment.
It's a dual anchor system.
It is. It allows for a broader, stronger grip for the ligamentum nucha, that big elastic ligament in the back of your neck. It's all about leverage and creating a stable anchor point.
It's an amazing level of detail. And then finally, regarding the typical neck bones, we have to talk about the joints, the articular facets. These are the flat spots where the vertebrae actually touch and move on each other.
This is the absolute key to the neck's mobility. The shape of the joint dictates the movement it allows. In the neck, these facets are relatively flat and they're angled. The superior ones, the top ones, face upward and backward. The inferior or bottom ones face downward and forward.
Okay, visualize this with me. Up and back on top, down and forward on the bottom. It's like a sloped ramp, roughly at a 45-degree angle, right?
Correct. Think of shingles on a roof, but much less steep. Because they are sloped like that, rather than being locked in vertically like they are in the low back, it allows for a huge range of flexion and extension. It lets you look down at your phone and look up at the sky. The bones literally glide over each other on that ramp.
But that ramp also permits rotation, doesn't it?
Some rotation, yes. And side bending. It's the most free design in the entire spine. But, that freedom comes at a cost.
Stability.
Exactly. The cost of stability. It's much easier to dislocate a cervical vertebra than a lumbar one because those ramps are relatively shallow. You can literally slide right off the edge if the force is high enough.
High mobility, low stability. The fighter jet analogy really holds up.
It really does.
Now, that covers the typical guys, the worker bees in the middle of the neck. But we need to talk about the celebrities. The top two vertebrae. Section 2 of our outline calls this the mythology and mechanics of the top.
These are the atypical cervical vertebrae, C1 and C2, and they are special.
Let's start with C1, the Atlas.
A perfect name.
Based on the Greek Titan, Atlas, who was condemned to hold up the sky or the earth, depending on which statue you look at, for all eternity.
And anatomically, C1 holds up the globe of the skull.
But when you look at the diagram of the Atlas, it looks nothing like a vertebra. If I found this in the dirt, I'd think it was a weird washer or a piece of industrial piping.
It is essentially just a ring of bone. It has no body, and it has no spinous process sticking out the back.
Wait, let's pause on no body. We just said the body is the main weight-bearing drum. How on earth can it hold up the head with no body?
It transfers the weight differently. It uses its lateral masses. These are thick, sturdy chunks of bone on the sides of the ring. And on top of those masses, you have these large, kidney-shaped concave facets.
Kidney-shaped scoops.
Exactly. And the base of the skull, the occipital bone, has two rounded rockers called the occipital condyles. These rockers sit right into those kidney-shaped scoops of the atlas.
So it's the cradle. The skull is being cradled by the atlas.
It is. This forms the atlanto-occipital joint. And think about the shape. A rocker in a scoop. What motion does that allow?
Just rocking, back and forth, nodding.
Yes. This is the yes joint. It allows you to nod your head in agreement. It's almost purely for flexion and extension. It severely limits rotation, though. You can't really twist your head at this joint.
So the atlas is purely for saying yes. But you mentioned it has no spine on the back.
Just a tiny little bump called the posterior tubercle. And think about why. If C1 had a big, long bifid spine sticking out the back, every time you looked up to extend your neck, every time you tried to nod yes, that spine would jam right into the base of your skull.
Ouch. Yeah, that would be a problem.
Exactly. So evolution just shaved it off. It removed the obstruction so you can look straight up at the stars.
Smart. But now we have a mystery. The atlas has no body. Where'd the body go?
Well, this brings us to its partner in crime, C2, the axis.
The pivot point.
The axis is arguably the most distinct-looking bone in the entire spine. It has a body, but sticking straight up out of that body is this massive tooth-like peg.
The den.
Or the odontoid process. Odontoid literally means tooth-like.
And this is the plot twist in the developmental story, right? This is what the notes call the heist.
It is. Embryologically, that tooth, the dens, actually started out as the body of the atlas. Millions of years ago, or rather very early in fetal development, the body of C1 detaches and migrates down, and it fuses onto the top of C2.
So the atlas is missing its body because the axis stole it.
Essentially, yes. You can think of C2 as a two-headed vertebra. It has its own body plus the stolen body of C1 stacked on top.
And nature repurposed it.
Brilliantly. That stolen body now sticks up and acts as a pivot post. The ring of the atlas slides over that post. The anterior arch of the atlas hugs the front of the dens.
So the atlas rotates around the dens of the axis.
Like a wheel rotating around an axle, hence the name axis.
And that rotation allows?
The no motion, shaking your head from side to side. Roughly 50% of all the rotation in your entire neck happens right there at that one single joint.
That's incredible. So the yes motion happens between the skull and C1, and the no motion happens between C1 and C2.
Exactly. It brilliantly separates the motions into two different, highly specialized joint systems. It's just incredible engineering. If you tried to do both motions at one joint, it would be incredibly unstable and inefficient.
But speaking of instability, that setup sounds pretty precarious to me. You have a ring of bone spinning around a vertical peg of bone. What keeps it from slipping off? Or worse, what keeps that peg from jamming backwards into the spinal cord?
Ligaments. Specifically, one incredibly strong one called the transverse ligament of the atlas. It's a very thick, strong band that stretches across the ring of the atlas right behind the dens.
So it's like a seatbelt.
It is the seatbelt. It straps the dens tight against the front arch of the atlas, preventing it from moving backward. It ensures that when you bend your neck forward, the atlas doesn't slide forward and let that bony peg the dens crush the spinal cord behind it.
So if that ligament snaps.
It's catastrophic. The dens can drive directly into the brainstem. This is why fractures of the dens or ruptures of the transverse ligament, often from car accidents, are life-threatening injuries. The heist gave us incredible mobility, but it created a very specific vulnerability.
Before we leave the neck, we have to mention one more outlier. C7,
The vertebra prominens.
a prominent one.
This is the landmark. If you reach back right now and touch the base of your neck, that big bony bump you feel, that is almost certainly the spinous process of C7.
Why is it so big compared to the little snake tongue ones above it?
It's a transition vertebra. It's shifting gears. It's getting ready to become the thoracic spine. So its spine is long, thick, and crucially, it is not bifid. It doesn't split. It ends in a single large tubercle.
So it's like the border crossing between the neck and the chest.
It begins to look much more like a thoracic vertebra, but it still has that cervical ID badge, the foramen transversarium. Although, interestingly, the vertebral artery usually skips that hole in C7.
Wait, so the hole is there, but the artery doesn't use it.
Usually not. The artery typically enters the spine at the C6 level. The hole in C7 is often smaller, sometimes it's asymmetrical, and usually just contains a small accessory vein.
Oh, that's a great piece of trivia. The ID badge is there, but the VIP guest, the artery, doesn't use the door. It enters through the window on the floor above.
Exactly. It shows that C7 is really a hybrid. It has the layout of a cervical bone, but the artery knows it's too far down, so it just skips it.
Let's move to section 3, clinical quirks of the neck. Because when you have a system this complex, holes for arteries, stolen bodies, pivot joints, things can and do go wrong. The source material highlights a few conditions.
One of the most striking, I think, is Klippel-Feil syndrome.
This is a congenital condition, right? You're born with it.
It's a failure of segmentation. We talked about how the spine is segmented, all those separate blocks. In Klippel-Feil, the blueprint gets smudged. 2 or more of the cervical vertebrae fuse together into a solid block during development,
So instead of individual moving parts, you just have one big piece of bone.
which results in a characteristically short neck, a low hairline, and a very limited range of motion. It really highlights how important each of those individual joints are. If C3 and C4 are fused, you lose that segment of motion forever.
And then there is occipitalization of the atlas, which sounds like a heavy metal album, but is actually a medical condition.
It is, and it refers to the atlas C1 fusing directly to the occiput, which is the base of the skull.
So the yes joint is gone.
It's fused solid. The bone of the skull and the first vertebra become one continuous piece of bone. It's one of the most common abnormalities in this upper cervical region. And the problem isn't just the lack of knotting, it's that the fusion can narrow the space for the spinal cord or the vertebral artery as it enters the skull.
So the mechanics are compromised and the neural highway is threatened.
Precisely.
And we can't talk about the spine without talking about disc prolapse. We usually hear about slip discs in the lower back, from lifting a heavy box.
Right.
But the sources are clear. It happens in the neck, too.
It absolutely does. The mechanism is exactly the same. You have the intervertebral disc, which is like a shock absorber. It has that soft, gel-like center called the nucleus pulposus,
The jelly.
and a tough outer ring called the annulus fibrosus, the donut.
A very sturdy jelly donut between the bones.
Exactly. But if you have trauma or just cumulative wear and tear, that outer dough can crack. The inner jelly, the nucleus, squeezes out.
And in the neck, where does it go?
It usually goes posterolateral backwards and to the side, and that is exactly where the nerve roots are exiting the spine to go down your arm.
So a problem in your neck bone manifests as pain in your hand.
Exactly. It's called radiculopathy. Pressure on a nerve root in the cervical spine causes pain, numbness, or weakness that radiates down the arm, following the path of the brachial nerves. If you compress the C6 nerve root, your thumb might go numb. If you compress C7, your middle finger might feel tingly.
That is wild. It's a literal wiring diagram. You pinch the wire in the attic, and the light goes out in the basement.
It's a great reminder that everything is connected. A neck problem isn't always just a neck problem.
Okay, let's travel south. We are leaving the mobile, delicate fighter jet of the neck and entering the tank.
Option 4.
The thoracic region.
T1 through T12. The chest.
The vibe changes completely here, doesn't it?
It has to. The mandate changes. The neck was all about looking around. The thoracic spine is about protecting the vital organs, the heart and lungs, and acting as a solid anchor for the bellows of breathing.
So if I hand you a vertebra from this region, what is the ID badge? How do you know for sure it's thoracic?
The costal connection, costa, means rib. If a vertebra has smooth, polished facets on the side of its body that are meant for holding a rib, it is a thoracic vertebra. Period. Full stop.
No other vertebrae hold ribs.
Nope. Cervical don't, lumbar don't, only thoracic. If it has a rib divot, it's T-spine.
Look for the rib spots. Got it. Now, what does a typical thoracic vertebra, say from T2 to T8, look like?
Let's start with the body again. In the neck, it was that small rectangular block. Here it gets bigger, and the shape is very distinct. When you view it from above, the body is heart-shaped.
A heart-shaped box for the heart region. That's easy to remember.
It is, roughly equal in dimension front to back and side to side. But the key features are those costal facets on the side of the body. Typically, there are 2 on each side.
2. Why 2? I always thought one rib goes to one vertebra.
Not typically, no. Most ribs are communal. They like to share. The head of a typical rib actually plugs into the space between 2 vertebrae.
Oh, that's interesting. So it bridges the gap.
Right. It plugs into the disc and the bone above and the bone below. So a typical thoracic vertebra has a larger superior demifacet, which just means half facet on the top edge for its own rib, and a smaller inferior demifacet on the bottom edge for the rib below it.
So let's take rib 5, for example. It would plug into the bottom of T4 and the top of T5.
Correct. It articulates with both bodies and the disc in between them. This creates a very solid interlock chain. It's much stronger than a single point of contact would be.
Okay. Now, looking at the diagram, the transverse processes, the wings, are also totally different here. In the neck, they were delicate and had holes.
Here they are, large, strong, and club-shaped. They project backward and laterally, and crucially, they have another facet right on the tip.
More rib connections.
Yes. The rib actually attaches in 2 places. The head of the rib hits the body of the vertebrae, but the tubercle of the rib, a little bump further down the rib shaft, swings around and connects to the transverse process.
It's like a 2-point stabilizer, a brace.
Exactly. You have the costovertebral joint at the body and the costotransverse joint at the wing.
Why the double connection? What's the point?
It controls the motion. If the rib just connected at one point, it would wobble in all directions. By anchoring it at 2 points, you create a very defined axis of rotation. The rib can only pivot up and down like a bucket handle.
That is brilliant mechanics. That bucket handle motion is breathing.
That is breathing. That precise hinge allows the entire chest cavity to expand and contract in a predictable way.
Now let's look at the spinous processes in the thoracic spine. In the neck, they were the bifid snake tongues. Here, they look completely different.
They're long, slender, and they point sharply downward. Very steep.
The source text mentions the shingle effect.
Yes, especially in the mid-thoracic region, from about T5 to T8. The spines are so vertical that they overlap the vertebra below them, just like shingles on a roof. The tip of T6's spine covers the arch of T7.
Why? Is that for protection?
Protection, yes, but specifically to limit extension. It physically stops you from bending your back too far backward.
Which makes total sense. If you could bend backward like a contortionist in your upper back, you'd crush your lungs and heart. You'd compromise the volume of the chest cavity.
Right. The thoracic spine is designed to be stiff. The rib cage adds to that stiffness, and these shingled spines lock it down even further. It prioritizes stability over mobility every time.
And the vertebral foramen, the spinal cord hole.
It's circular and it's smaller than in the cervical region. The spinal cord itself is thinner here because it's already given off the massive nerves for the arms. It just doesn't need as much room, so the hole tightens up.
Okay, we've touched on this, but let's explicitly hit section 5, the mechanics of the rib cage connection. We mentioned the 2 joints.
The costovertebral and the costotransverse.
But there are ligaments involved too, right? This isn't just bone rattling on bone. The diagram here looks like a spider web of tape holding everything together.
Oh, it's strapped down incredibly tight. You have the radiate ligament, which fans out like a sunburst from the head of the rib to the vertebral bodies. You have the interarticular ligament inside the joint itself. And then you have the superior costotransverse ligaments holding the neck of the rib to the transverse process of the vertebra above it.
It sounds like an over-engineered suspension bridge.
It really needs to be. Think about how many times you breathe in a day.
I don't know. Thousands. Tens of thousands.
Roughly 20,000 times a day. That joint has to move, pivoting up and down 20,000 times a day, every day of your life without dislocating and without wearing out.
That is a staggering reliability spec.
And at the same time, it has to be rigid enough to protect your heart from a punch to the chest, but flexible enough to act as a bellows for air. That tension, that balance between rigidity and mobility, is maintained by this incredibly complex ligament system.
Moving on to section 6. Just like the neck had its oddballs, the atlas and axis, the thoracic spine has its own rule breakers, the atypical thoracic vertebrae.
T1, T9, T10, T11, and T12, the ones at the top and bottom of the region.
Let's start at the top. T1. The notes call it the imposter.
T1 is having an identity crisis. It sits right below the neck, so it looks very much like a cervical vertebra. Its body is cervical-shaped, it's broad and flat, its spine is nearly horizontal, not pointing down, but it has ribs.
So it gets the thoracic ID badge.
It does, but notice the facets. We said typical ribs share vertebrae. They plug into the gap between bones. But the first rib, it's special. It connects only to T1.
So T1 doesn't have a gamma facet on top.
No, it has a complete circular facet for the entire head of the first rib. The first rib is short, very curved, very tight, and it doesn't like to share. T1 holds it entirely.
And then T1 has a little gamma facet on the bottom for the second rib, which is more of a team player.
Correct. So T1 is full facet on top, half facet on the bottom. It's unique.
Okay, so T1 is the anchor for the first rib. Then T2 through T8 are typical. Then we hit T9.
T9 is the demi transition. It usually lacks the bottom demi facet.
Because the rib below it, the 10th rib, doesn't want to connect to T9 anymore.
Exactly. The 10th rib typically connects only to the T10 vertebra. So T9 stops sharing its bottom edge. It just has the top half facet for the 9th rib.
Which leads us to T10, the loner.
T10 has a single large oval facet for the 10th rib. But look closely at where that facet is. In the typical vertebrae, the facet is on the side of the body. In T10, that facet starts creeping backward onto the pedicle, the little bridge of bone connecting the body to the arch.
It's migrating.
It is. It's moving away from the body. And that migration continues with T11 and T12.
Right, T11 and T12, the floating rib anchors.
These articulate with the floating ribs, 11 and 12. These ribs are short, and they don't wrap around to connect to the sternum at the front. They just float in the muscle wall of your back.
And because they don't wrap around, the mechanics are totally different.
Completely. T11 and T12 have large, single circular facets on their bodies, actually mainly on their pedicles by now. But the big difference is in the transverse processes, the wings.
Right. We said the typical thoracic wings have a facet for the rib tubercle, that second point of connection.
T11 and T12 lack that transverse facet.
So they only have one connection point with the rib.
Yes. The floating ribs don't attach to the transverse process at all. They are much freer. They are less stable.
Why? Why give up that stability?
It allows for more mobility in the lower chest wall, which is important for the diaphragm during deep breathing and for twisting motions. But it also changes the shape of the vertebra. Since the transverse processes don't need to hold a rib, they become small and stubby. They lose their club shape and start looking different.
And then we get to T12. The notes call this the shapeshifter. This is the bone that really captured my imagination when I was reading.
T12 is fascinating. It is the ultimate hybrid. It is the Frankenstein's monster of the spine.
Walk us through it. Why is it so weird?
Okay, so look at the top half of T12. It has costal facets for the 12th rib. Its superior articular facets, the joints connecting to T11, face backward. It's behaving like a thoracic vertebra.
But the bottom half.
The bottom half thinks it's a lumbar vertebra. Look at the articular processes, the joints that connect to the bone below, L1. In the thoracic spine, these facets are flat plates oriented in the frontal plane. But at the bottom of T12, the facets turn 90 degrees. They become curved and face inward and outward, just like lumbar vertebrae.
So the joint mechanism changes from a sliding plate to a locking curve right in the middle of this one single bone.
Yes. And the spinous process changes too. It stops pointing down like a shingle and starts pointing straight back, short and broad, like a lumbar block. This transition point is sometimes called the anticlinical point.
The text mentions T12 has mammillary, accessory, and transverse tubercles.
Right. These are little bumps on the transverse process that are precursors to the much larger processes found in the lumbar spine. Basically, T12 is a lumbar vertebra that is masquerading as a thoracic one just because it still has to hold on to that one small rib.
It's wearing a fake mustache to get into the thoracic club.
Essentially. But this design, this abrupt transition, has a massive consequence.
The stress.
Huge amounts of stress. This is the thoracolumbar junction. You have the stiff rigid column of the rib cage, sitting directly on top of the highly mobile, swaying column of the lumbar spine. T12 is the hinge.
It takes the brunt of the force transfer between two totally different systems.
It absolutely does. Because of that abrupt change in mechanics, from a rotation-based system in the chest to a flexion-extension system in the lumbar spine, T12 is the most commonly fractured vertebra in traumatic injuries. If you fall from a height and land on your feet, the force travels up your legs, up your stable lumbar spine, and then explodes at T12, the first point of change.
It's the weak link precisely because it's the transition link.
Precise.
Okay, let's zoom out from the specific bones and look at how they form in the first place. Section 7. Developmental anatomy. Because these shapes, the heart body, the beasted spine, they have to grow from something.
Ossification, the process of turning cartilage into bone.
The source material mentions the 3 primary centers rule. What's that?
A typical vertebra doesn't just grow as one lump of bone. It ossifies from 3 primary centers. You have one center for the centrum, which will become the body, and then you have one center for each half of the neural arch, the left and right sides of the ring that protects the spinal cord.
When does this start happening?
Incredibly early. The 8th or 9th week of intrauterine life. So before you were even born, these little islands of bone are already forming in the cartilage model.
And then they have to fuse together to make the complete bone.
Yes. The 2 halves of the arch fuse in the midline, behind the spinal cord during the first year of life, and then the arch fuses to the body a bit later, usually between ages 3 and 6.
But what happens if they don't fuse properly? The outline mentions spina bifida.
Spina bifida is exactly that, a failure of fusion. The 2 halves of the neural arch fail to meet and close in the midline.
So the ring protecting the spinal cord is left open at the back.
Yes. It can be a mild form, spina bifida occulta, which is hidden. Maybe there's just a tuft of hair on the skin over the spot. The bone is open, but the spinal cord is fine.
And the more severe version.
That would be spina bifida cystica. This is where the meninges, the covering of the cord, or sometimes the spinal cord itself actually protrudes out through that gap in the bone. It creates a cyst or a sac on the baby's back. It just shows how critical that simple timing of fusion is.
And the text also mentions hemivertebra.
Hemi means half. This happens if one of the ossification centers for the body fails to develop, so you only grow the left half of the vertebra, for example, but not the right half.
So instead of a square block, you end up with a triangular wedge.
A wedge? And
What?
if you put a wedge in a column of blocks, what happens to the column?
It tilts. It leans over.
It curves sideways. This is a very common cause of congenital scoliosis. The spine grows sideways because one of the foundational bricks is triangular instead of square.
It's incredible how these tiny developmental errors in the first few weeks of life can determine the entire structure of the human body for decades to come.
Anatomy is destiny in many ways.
So we've covered the ground. Let's try to synthesize this. We started at the top with the atlas and axis, the yes and no machines.
A delicate, high-risk, high-mobility system that gives us our sensory orientation in the world.
We moved down through the specialized cervical vertebrae, their bifid spines and their tunnels for the arteries.
High complexity, shielding the brain's critical blood supply while allowing incredible movement.
We hit the transition at C7, and then we entered the fortress of the thoracic spine.
Heart-shaped bodies, shingled spines preventing you from bending backward, and those complex rib linkages that allow us to breathe 20,000 times a day without fail.
And finally, the shape-shifting T12 that bridges us from the rigid chest to the mobile lower back.
The stress point, the hinge, the bone with an identity crisis.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Why should you care about the shape of a demifacet or a bifid spinous process?
Because it explains your own body's capabilities and its limitations. It explains why your neck is stiff after looking down at a laptop. You are fighting the natural curve and the muscle attachments on those bifid spines. It explains why a rib injury hurts every single time you take a breath, because that costovertebral joint is mechanically linked to the breath. Understanding the structure helps you respect the machine.
Respect the machine. I like that. It's not just a stick in your back. It's a series of highly specialized tools that blend seamlessly one into the next.
It's a marvel of evolutionary engineering.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on, something to leave you with. We talked about T12, that perfect mix of thoracic and lumbar features. It's a physical manifestation of adaptation. But think about this. T12 is the pivot point between the rigid chest and the mobile lower back. It takes the most stress.
It absolutely does.
In a world where so many of us sit all day, hunched over a desk or a screen, we are locking down our thoracic spine even more than nature intended. If the chest becomes too rigid from a lack of movement, that rotational force has to go somewhere. Does it travel down and destabilize T12 in the upper lumbar spine? How much of our modern back pain epidemic is actually caused by us losing the subtle, healthy mobility of the thoracic cage, forcing those transition vertebrae to work double shifts they were never designed for?
That is a very distinct and troubling possibility. The rigidity we add by our modern lifestyle compounds the rigidity nature gave us for protection, and that stress has to be absorbed somewhere.
Something to think about the next time you twist, grab your coffee. Move that thoracic spine. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.